Okay, let's dive right in. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack the hard physics and the deeply classified forensic reality behind one of the most enduring orbital mysteries of our time. We are looking at the true mathematically documented origin of what a lot of people know as the Black Knight anomaly. Now, we aren't going to get bogged down in wild internet rumors today. Instead, we're strictly looking at the orbital mechanics, the actual radar data, and the primary source documents from the Cold War. If you spend any amount of time looking into space anomalies online, you've almost certainly bumped into this question. Is there a 13,000-year-old alien probe actively orbiting Earth right now? It's a fantastic story, right? Complete with these menacing photos of a dark, jagged object just floating against the curvature of the Earth. But what's truly fascinating here is the stark contrast between that modern internet myth and the actual terrifying mathematical anomaly that kicked this whole story off in the very beginning. Because the truth, as our source material reveals, is so much more grounded in classified military infrastructure than in extraterrestrial visitors. So let's map this out really quickly just to anchor ourselves in the history. The timeline is absolutely crucial here. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, which effectively kicks off the space race. Just 3 years later, in 1960, the SPASUR anomaly is detected. Now, this is the real mathematical impossibility we're focusing on today. But leap all the way forward to 1998, and you get the STS-88 Endeavour photograph, which is the image basically everyone associates with the Black Knight. Our source document makes a really compelling argument. That famous 1998 photo of floating space trash actually serves to obscure the much more significant, highly classified reality of what went down back in 1960. Right off the bat, let's instantly clear up that 1998 photograph. The source material is completely unequivocal here. That super high-resolution image of the jagged black object taken by the Space Shuttle Endeavour crew, it is undeniably a trunnion pin thermal cover. Basically, it's just a thermal blanket that astronaut Jerry Ross accidentally lost during a spacewalk while constructing the International Space Station. But here's the kicker. The document suggests the intelligence community is perfectly happy letting the public endlessly conflate this piece of space trash with the Black Knight mythos. Why? Because having people debate a lost thermal blanket is literally the perfect decoy to hide the actual events of 1960. Section 1. The 1960 Detection SPASUR Radar Anomaly. Let's travel back to February 1960. The U.S. Navy had just made a system operational called the Space Surveillance System, or SPASUR for short. And we're not talking about a standard radar dish here. This was a massive, completely unacknowledged continuous wave radar fence stretching all the way across the southern United States. Its specific design purpose, to bounce radar waves straight up into space to catch any silent Soviet spy satellites trying to sneak overhead. And it worked. Except what SPASUR caught wasn't Soviet at all. It detected a massive dark object moving in a polar orbit. And in 1960, that one specific detail, the polar orbit, was exactly what sent absolute shockwaves through the military. Moving on to Section 2, Orbital Mechanics, the Polar Orbit Problem. To really understand why a polar orbit in 1960 caused such a massive panic, we have to look at the physics. Putting a satellite into an equatorial orbit is relatively cheap when it comes to fuel. You launch toward the east, and you get to utilize the Earth's rotational velocity, which is roughly 460 meters per second at the equator, as a totally free kinetic assist. It's kind of like stepping onto one of those moving walkways at the airport. But a polar orbit? No way. That requires launching straight north or south. You get absolutely zero help from the Earth. In fact, you are fighting entirely against the planet's rotation. To put some hard numbers to this, we look at the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation. Basically, delta V equals exhaust velocity times the natural log of the initial mass over the final mass. Okay, actually, let's not get completely lost in the variables here. The absolutely crucial takeaway from this formula is that fighting the Earth's rotation to get into a polar orbit doesn't just demand a little bit more fuel, it demands exponentially more explosive fuel and massive thrust. And the public understanding in 1960 was that neither the US nor the Soviets possessed a rocket with anywhere near that kind of delta V capability. But the mystery wasn't just the weird orbit, right? It was the size of the thing. When SPSR pinged this object, the radar cross-section analysis estimated the unknown object weighed roughly 15 tons. Seriously, wrap your head around that for a second. 15 tons in 1960. To put exactly how massive this discrepancy was into perspective, the absolute heaviest unclassified U.S. satellite at the time was from the Discoverer series, and it weighed roughly 3,000 pounds. Compare that to the SPASUR unknown object, which was estimated at 30,000 pounds, or 15 tons.
The public math dictated an absolute impossibility. Humanity simply did not have the rockets required to put a 15-ton object into a polar orbit. So when this leak hit the press, the global media understandably panicked, assuming it just had to be a massive Soviet orbital nuclear weapon, or worse, an extraterrestrial probe. Section 3. The Forensic Reality Project Corona. So what the heck was it? Well, the source material reveals that the 15-ton object wasn't alien, and it definitely wasn't Soviet. It was deeply classified American hardware. It belonged to the CIA and the Air Force's Corona project, which basically served as the foundational hardware for what would become the National Reconnaissance Office. Now, you obviously can't hide a massive rocket launching out of Vandenberg Air Force Base from the public, so the CIA created a brilliant alibi. They called it the Discoverer program and told everyone it was just civilian biological science, launching mice and monkeys into space. But the true mission was espionage. They were secretly launching Keyhole, or KH-1, 70mm panoramic spy cameras, and they explicitly needed that impossible polar orbit so the satellite could scan the entire surface of the Earth, specifically hunting for Soviet nuclear silos, as the planet literally rotated beneath it. The mechanics of this early surveillance are just absolutely fascinating. Because this was way before the era of digital data transmission, they had to use physical polyester-based film. So the satellite would scan the Earth with its 70mm camera, and then, get this, it would literally eject a film bucket back into the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. The heat shield would drop off at around 60,000 feet. Parachutes would pop open, and then, in an absolute feat of analog engineering, specially equipped Fairchild C-119 aircraft would swoop in and physically catch the parachuting capsule in midair using trailing cables. I mean, how wild is that? So bringing it all back, what did the SPASUR radar fence actually hit in 1960? The source explicitly identifies it for us. The object was simply a large, errant section of the casing from the highly classified Discoverer 8 spy satellite launch. The U.S. military actually had secretly mastered the immense thrusts required for polar orbits, but a piece of their classified rocket casing got stuck up there, and their own brand new Navy radar accidentally flagged it. Whoops. Section 4. Archonic Misdirection, Weaponizing Space Trash. So when the Navy's radar accidentally outed the Air Force and CIA's top-secret spy debris, the Pentagon faced a massive dilemma. They utilized what our source text calls an archonic misdirection, which is basically a system of deliberate, layered psychological control. Think about it. If they admitted what that 15-ton object actually was, they would instantly expose their highly illegal, multi-billion-dollar Corona espionage program to both the Soviets and the American public. So they made a highly calculated choice. As our source document plainly states, the military-industrial complex realized that the public's appetite for extraterrestrial mysteries was the perfect camouflage for black-budget infrastructure. Rather than admitting they were violating Soviet airspace with spy cameras, they just sort of stepped back and let the media run wild with stories of alien probes. And as you'll see, that strategy has really evolved over the decades. Back in 1960, they hid their analog Corona film buckets behind the panic of an unknown satellite. By 1998, they allowed that NASA thermal blanket to become the brand new face of the Black Knight myth. And the source argues this exact tactic continues today, completely obscuring the terrifying reality that the intelligence apparatus has basically blanketed low Earth orbit with highly classified hardware for over 6 decades, which has now culminated in modern laser-linked digital swarms like the Starshield network. Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question raised by the source material. Are you busy debating the origins of a piece of floating space trash while completely ignoring the 60-year, highly classified orbital surveillance grids staring down at you from above? It just brilliantly illustrates how modern myths can be intentionally manufactured or at the very least allowed to flourish, specifically to hide classified mathematical and physical realities in plain sight. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope it changes the way you look at the night sky.